Now that Georgia's won the national championship, it becomes a sort of natural question. What's going to be different this spring than in springs gone by? A couple of notes here about, excuse me, where we were a year ago coming into 2021 spring. You had the return of JT Daniels, return of Devonte Wyatt, Jordan Davis, several guys announcing that they were coming back. So, in many ways, Georgia, I don't know if this is the best way to put it, they sort of announced that they were making a run for the national championship before the spring even started. We were coming off a year of 10 games only because of COVID. We're coming off of it would have been it would they were we were going into the first spring football that Georgia had since 2019. So whereas a lot of things changed, last spring was very rare. Well, this one's extremely rare in that Georgia's never come off a national championship coming into a spring for 40 years, 41 years, whatever you want to call it. And there's been a lot of coaching turnover. Um, that there is coaching turnover is not strange that there's this much. Well, it's just, kind of bizarre. Well, bizarre is the wrong way. It's noticeable. And I think the thing, when you start talking about last spring, there were question marks. I mean, you did not have DeAndre Kendrick. He was not on campus. So at DB, Keely Ringo had not been cleared to, I don't know if he'd been cleared. I think he'd been cleared, but he had never really played. If you want to pick up DAWGSTRUCTION, click the link down below. Um, and there was still something to prove for Georgia coming into the last spring. What we're going into now, the question I think more than anything is, can Georgia repeat? Can they do what they just did? The answer to that is almost always no. And I think the answer will be no this year, but I'm not completely convinced of it. We've talked about this a lot on here, or I've talked with you all about this a lot on here, which is that although Alabama should be considered the favorite, I'm not sure how much a fall off there is between the two programs. Someone has to be considered the favorite, and that Alabama is the favorite makes sense to me. That Georgia is the second favorite, betting favorite, makes sense to me too, to be honest. So those two, and then Ohio State seem to be in position to have to have their championship moments, to have um, games in a season where folks remember them and have pivotal moments in games like that. This spring, there's going to be still plenty to figure out. But there will, as usual, be the requisite injuries, guys staying out for injuries this season, the most notable being Brock Bowers. But how it will be different is that Georgia will have a lot off of the collective fan base will have a lot off of its back. There's that is gone. Spring ball always leads to questions. And I don't think this will be any different. I think the questions that are asked are going to be different than in years gone by because can Georgia win the national championship is out the window. I mean, you see it right behind me. It's that's done. The new question is, can they repeat? Can they win the national championship a second time? From here on out, the only question asked about this program will be, I mean, frankly, until they fall, will be can they win the national championship this year? Not can they? Will they win the national championship this year? And there's a big difference between can and will. And you don't know the answer to will until the last game of the season. The answer to can is always there. I mean, Georgia can win the national championship uh, 4 years out of five. I mean, even looking back on it, um, during Kirby's tenure at Georgia, they had the capability of winning the national championship in 17, 18, and 19. probably not in 16 and 20. Um, Although I don't know how far off they were from being so great. I mean, they played Alabama as hard as anybody did in 2020, but they were that far away from Alabama in 2020. I think the other thing too that people will kind of kick around is um, everyone's going to naturally compare Georgia and Alabama, but I do think Ohio State is in the middle of this thing too. They're just not in the SEC. I think that's one thing. Often we'll get Alabama fans on here that are pretty sensitive, and I get that. But I think the reason why they're so sensitive about Georgia is that Georgia's in the league. They've seen the recruiting Georgia's done, and Georgia has a guy as the head coach that they're very familiar with who's been successful at Alabama and Kirby. Um, so all of those things make for a direct comparison that you can have with Georgia and Bama in a way that you can't with Clemson and Alabama or Georgia and Ohio State or something like that. That they're in the same league really does make a difference. But for me, looking at the big stories coming into this spring, I guess it's going to be who will play linebacker, uh, who will be left tackle. I'm not necessarily going in order. Um, and then, will Stetson Bennett get pushed as a quarterback, which I'm a little more skeptical of than a lot of folks out there. I just think that for Stetson, just like Jake Fromm, it's going to be hard to displace a person that played in the national championship game. And not only that, but Stetson was the most valuable player in that game with his play in the fourth quarter. Nothing at Georgia is ever set in stone. We've seen 16, 17, 20, and 21 that the starting quarterback at the beginning of the season has not finished the season as a starting quarterback. So the starting quarterback job at Georgia is perhaps one of the most perilous things in college football. But and it only takes a game or two where you don't play well, where people really kind of get fired up, ready to make a change. Whether that happens inside the program, I'm not as certain. Stetson didn't really play very well against Alabama and Atlanta. I don't think he played as poorly as some people kind of act like he did, but they weren't going to change. They weren't going to change back to JT Daniels, and as it turns out, they were right. So um, whoever is trying to knock Stetson off is going to have better pedigree than JT Daniels did. And it's right now it's hard to feel like that's something that's going to happen. But these are things we talk about in the spring. Georgia's going to kick off spring ball on Tuesday. We've got pro day on Wednesday. Hey, we've got a big dog post, DAWGSTRUCTION. Make sure you're picking that up down below. And we'll see you over on the website. Thanks for watching.